happy to be part of this Texas Hispanic Farmer and Rancher Conference. And I hope that we can all learn from all the great presentations we're going to have, that we can network with other farmers and ranchers so that we can help each other and improve our operations. Today I'm going to be speaking on high tunnel or hoop house production in South Texas. And I've been able to be exposed or work on high tunnels for quite a few years now. I remember learning from these structures back in the early 2000s when I was in school, and they had just built a brand new high tunnel. It was a very large tunnel, and they used some technology from Israel that had some type of ventilation on the roof. And after we saw that structure, me and my cousin, we decided to build one ourselves. So we built one, and we planted tomatoes and peppers, and we could tell the difference from growing inside a high tunnel compared with growing outdoors. And so today we're gonna be talking about high tunnels, and I hope that it can be a good experience for everyone. The topics I'm gonna be covering are why it's important to grow inside a high tunnel. We also are going to talk about the different types of structures. We're going to cover some of the advantages and, of course, some of the challenges of growing in high tunnels. We are going to talk about what crops do well here in South Texas. And we're going to talk about irrigation, different types of irrigation that you can use inside a high tunnel. So a great question is why to grow inside a high tunnel. On this picture you can see those beautiful lettuces, and on the left you will see some Malabar spinach. Malabar spinach is a hot weather plant, and this picture was taken in Baltimore, and it was the winter time. So that tells you a little bit about why to grow in high tunnels. So high tunnels are structures that are covered mainly with plastic, and they are designed to, protect our plants from the crazy weather that we have. High tunnels allow us to protect our plants from the cold, the rain, hail, the wind, and even from the heat by replacing the plastic with a shade cloth and allowing us to lower the temperature in our tunnel. We know that here in South Texas we can have very drastic changes in temperature, where we can be 90 degrees on one evening and suddenly we get a strong wind from the northwest and temperature starts dropping. By the next day we have a freeze. Also, we have seen some very damaging situations with hail and, of course, the wind, which is blowing most of the time from the southeast, sometimes very strong, which damages our plants. It burns them sometimes if it's too hot, and also it damages our fruits by moving them constantly, rubbing against the stem, leaving a scar. This picture can give us an idea how these high tunnels function. When it's cold and the high tunnel is closed, the solar radiation comes through the plastic and it gets stored inside the high tunnel, keeping our plants warm. Also, it will help us during a freeze, and it will provide protection. And as I mentioned before, great benefit that we can get from these structures is protection from the wind. Nowadays, there are many different types of high tunnel. One of them is the Gothic style that you can see on this image. And the characteristic of this structure is that it has a pointed arch. I think different companies are trying out or researching different structures, trying to make them stronger. And so that's why they come with different styles, I would say. Another structure, and probably the most common one, is a round style high tunnel. I have currently two of this type, and we will see some pictures of the stuff that we're growing in them later on. There is also the extra tall high tunnels, which are designed mainly to grow very tall crops like indeterminate growth tomatoes or cucumbers that can grow up to 12 feet high. Also, for good ventilation, they design them very tall with those two purposes. If you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned some high tunnels they built in my school that had some ventilation on the roof, and it looked just like that. It was technology from Israel. The wind gets through there and it flows inside the high tunnel very well. Another type, and probably very innovative, you might think this is something new, but actually they did this type of high tunnels a long time ago as a tryout. It wasn't working very well back then, but of course, like, they have improved it, and now some farms up north are using it, which is a movable high tunnel. You can see it has rails at the bottom, and they can move it in the different seasons. As farmers, we are always trying to maximize the use of our land and of our resources. And one of the benefits of these structures, for example, will be that you're using the tunnel to protect some crops, while at the same time you're planting on the next area. When one of the crops is finished, you terminate it or completes its cycle, the other one already will be started and you could move it and protect the other crop. You're maximizing the use of your land right there. Another benefit is when you have a high tunnel, you're protecting the soil from the natural elements all the time. And sometimes you start seeing some problems with that. And with this structure, it will allow you to move the tunnel and expose your soil to the elements to control sometimes some pests that happen because it's always protected by the plastic. Another benefit that they use up north is they use the structure as a coop for the hens on the winter months. Of course, that's more for the north. As everything, there is some disadvantages that come with this type of a structure. Of course, they cost more per square foot due to all the additional components needed to be moved. You need to do more planning on this structure so you can actually maximize its use. You will have to plan very well the planting times and the harvesting so you can be moving it around and use it the most that you can. A very cool thing is that you can actually bend your own arches. You can see that tool gadget there. The gentleman is bending a pipe, and just using like pipes for fence, you can build your own high tunnel. I'm gonna show you on the next slide a small high tunnel my wife and I built in the back of our house. This small high tunnel, like I said, we built it ourselves, my wife and I, just using that bending tool that you can find online. And we built it to grow all of our transplants in there. This is in Weslaco, and you can build it in one day. And so it's not that complicated, and it provides a lot of benefits. You can see here we had already set up some tables for our seedlings, and we were growing some tomatoes, peppers, and some brassicas. We didn't install any plastic on the ends. It was just providing protection from the rain and from the wind. And later on, we closed the ends when it started getting too cold. You can build a high tunnel from many different materials. In this case, we can see this person, they build their hoop house using PVC pipes. And usually they set a rebar on the ground on one side and then slide the PVC pipe in and bend it until the other rebar is. To set up the plastic, you can see they use some strings. So there are many options. One comes with some more advantages, some with some disadvantages, and we'll talk about it as well. On this picture, we can see how they built a high tunnel using like secondhand lumber. Still providing the benefits of protection from the weather, but of course, they're not going to be as resistant to strong winds. So let's talk about some of the advantages of the high tunnels. One will be that you can have a more continuous production, and that's when, like I said, you can also grow during the summer. You can replace the plastic or throw a shade cloth on top of the plastic and help us with the strong or hot summers we have. So that will allow you to have more production without stopping on the summer. You can capture and maintain a market. Sometimes a restaurant might they need the product not just during a few weeks throughout the year. They need it continuously, and that will help you to maintain that market. You can get better prices, of course. The final product is looking better, is of better quality, and of course you will have continuous income because you will be selling. So I mentioned the quality when you grow inside, it's way better than when it's outdoors. You see less pests, less weeds, and very important, less wind damage. And also very important, you obtain higher yields growing in a high tunnel. Now, what are some of the disadvantages or challenges of having a high tunnel? A very important one is that there is going to be an initial investment, which is usually high. I was just going back to an invoice of our first high tunnel we purchased back in 2013, and it cost us $9,000 including shipping, and it was a 25 by 100 length high tunnel. Related to this, I would like to mention that the NRCS, they have a program called the EQUIP program where they provide financial assistance to get this type of a structure. So if you're interested in having one of these hoop houses or high tunnels, I encourage you to visit your NRCS local office and ask about the type of financial support they have, what are the requirements, and see if you can qualify for their assistance, which I would really recommend. It really helped me to get my first high tunnel here in Texas. Of course, the labor is always gonna be intense. For example, you're growing indeterminate tomatoes, and we know their growth is very aggressive, so you have to be constantly pruning them. Since they're gonna be growing very fast, very tall, you have to set up a trellis system, be trellising them often because they are constantly growing. You need to be monitoring temperatures, you need to be monitoring the water. If it rains outside, it's not going to rain inside the high tunnel, so you have to have a good watering system, and we will talk about different types of irrigation towards the end of this presentation. And another one very important is that you have to control your humidity levels. For example, when it gets cold, these type of structures are not like greenhouse where you can have fans or some other type of ventilators, electrical ventilators or cooling walls or things like that. The humidity and temperature is just controlled by the ventilation you have, which is basically opening the sides or the doors. And so a problem that we encounter is that sometimes the humidity is very high inside a high tunnel when you have it closed, and that's gonna lead to fungal diseases, especially on your squashes or your cucumbers. So you have to be making sure that your there checking, monitoring, opening the sides, and making sure there is some type of ventilation. Another thing, as I mentioned before, when the soil is covered, there is going to be a natural rain cycle on our soils, and that might start concentrating the salts in our soil. For example, you are using city water or the irrigation water from the district, and we know that usually is very high in salts. So at some point you need to flush it, and you need to pay attention to that. And that's when the movable high tunnels are useful, because you can move it and expose the soil to the rain, flush those salts, and that's a benefit. But of course, it's a higher investment that needs to be considered for each farmer. Another disadvantage is that, as I mentioned also before, we have hurricanes, or sometimes we have very strong winds here in South Texas that they can cause some damage, structural damage, and affecting your high tunnel and your investment. I've seen some structures that are completely destroyed after a high wind. And so that's another thing. Once you install a high tunnel, it's gonna demand your attention, and always be paying attention to those details. What are some of the crops that grow well inside a high tunnel here in South Texas? Some of the ones that I have experience with are the ones on the list on the left: tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, lettuce, zucchini, and peppers. All of those crops, they do very well when you grow them in a high tunnel. Now, when you compare growing outdoors versus growing inside a high tunnel, you can see big differences. And I'm going to comment on some of the benefits I have noticed by growing in a high tunnel. Something I have noticed is the plant growth and the yield. It's always better when you grow in a high tunnel. For example, tomatoes, cherry tomatoes or heirloom tomatoes, I could see that they grow faster, the plants look healthier. I could see also that we obtain higher yields, and we had a better stink bug control, because we trellis them and we prune them, and allow us to see better what kind of pests are in there. Compare when you grow outdoors and you stake them and you don't prune them, and then you cannot see what's going on in between the plants, and those stink bugs, they start reproducing very fast. When you notice it, it's kind of too late. They have done a lot of damage, and they have really reproduced, and it's very hard to control. Same thing with the cucumbers. They grow faster, the yields increase. The only things I noticed that were a problem for us by growing cucumbers was that we had problems with powdery mildew because of the high moisture, downy mildew, and sometimes we had problems with spider mites. And we know those spider mites, they start reproducing, or they love the environment when it's dusty and too dry. If you don't maintain a good moisture in your soil, a good moisture, you don't water for a little while, and it gets too dry in there, those spider mites, they start thriving. And just as the stink bugs, they are very hard to control. You can use pyganic, it's pyrethroids, but you will have to do it like in a regular basis for a few days to see some type of control. They are a very resilient bugs. Squash, like for example, I don't like to grow squash that grow on a vine, but the bush type like zucchini, it's unbelievable the benefits you can see when you grow in a high tunnel. The plants grow a lot bigger, the leaves are bigger, the yield also is higher. But the same, since they're in the same family with cucumbers, we struggle a lot with powdery mildew, but we notice we can get a pretty decent control of powdery mildew by doing regular applications of neem oil. We use 2 ounces in a 4-gallon backpack. Lettuces also, I mean, they grow very fast, If you are growing a spring mix lettuce, which is like baby lettuce of different types and colors, they grow very fast and you can get more cuts. Like you cut it 1 week and by the next week they grew back and you can do another cut, and you can do even 6 cuts on a spring mix lettuce, which you cannot see those things happening outdoors. The leaves grow very tender because they don't have that wind blowing, and the plant just, just pretty much just thinks on growing. So the leaves are very tender, and we notice that the flavor is not bitter or as bitter as compared when you're growing outdoors. And same thing with eggplant, bigger and healthier plants. We notice the blooms started coming earlier, and a big thing for us was seeing less wind scars on our fruits. When you grow eggplants outside, the wind is moving those plants, and the stem is rubbing against the fruit, and then it leaves a mark, leaves a scar, and it's still a edible fruit. It's a nutritious fruit, but we are taught that they need to look perfect and shiny and pretty. And so once you go to the market, we know some people is gonna go for the more beautiful one. So you grow in a high tunnel, you're gonna have better eggplants for sure by protecting them from the wind. You can see in the picture the difference between growing outdoors and growing inside a high tunnel. We planted them at the same time, and it was amazing how fast they grew inside a high tunnel. You can see already a bloom on the one that was grown on the high tunnel, so it's considerably the benefits you can see. So a recommendation would be, since you are going to invest on the structure, to try to identify which crops the more money per square foot. You want to maximize the use of your high tunnel. And of course, each area is going to be different. The markets are different. People pay different prices in different areas, but identify which ones can give you the more money so you can maximize the use of your high tunnel. Another thing will be also trying to grow vertically by using trellises or stakes, and that will give you a better use of your high tunnel. And that's, for example, I mentioned I wouldn't grow squash on a vine, or if I grow cucumbers, I trellis them and prune them so they grow upwards, and I can grow more plants per square foot. Another thing will be consider growing uncommon crops that are hard to be grown outdoors, and possibly you can sell them for a better price. Very soon, I want to try growing ginger and turmeric, and I've seen some other farmers growing them very well inside the high tunnel. Now, really quick, let's talk about irrigation. It's a topic very important since I mentioned that the natural rain cycle is not going to happen inside a high tunnel. If you're going to grow a crop in a high tunnel, you need irrigation for sure. The most common one, it's drip irrigation. It's going to help you to conserve water, and it's going to set a drop of water on each plant. The drip irrigation can be connected to the city water or to a pond. And another one will be sprinklers. Why sprinklers are useful? I mentioned when it gets too dry and too dusty in the high tunnel, some pests start thriving, like those spider mites. So you want to provide some type of moisture in there, kind of mimicking the rain. And at the same time, you can use sprinklers to cool down temperature inside your high tunnel. So those two will be the main ones. For sure, I think you're going to need drip irrigation, and then you can complement it with the sprinkler ones. Well, I would like to wrap it up by letting you know about our beginning farmer and rancher program at UTRGV that we have. We're more than willing to help anyone that want to start farming, anyone that want to learn more about drip irrigation, high tunnel, organic production. Please reach out to us, and we will be happy to assist you, provide you some technical assistance on how to start these projects. Well, thank you for your time. please don't hesitate to contact us. That's my email. And please enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.
Juan, that was a fantastic presentation, and we have a whole bunch of questions here. So first from Madhvi Aboina, I hope that I didn't completely sort of butcher that. Apologies, because I'm sure that I did. We have a great first question, which is, I guess, what funding is available to build high tunnels here in South Texas?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the funding that we used to build our first high tunnel, it was through the Natural Resource Conservation Services, the NRCS, and they have a program called the EQUIP program, and I encourage you to visit their office and find out what are the requirements, fill out the application, and I mean, I think they're covering, well, I know it changes year to year, but last time when we built a high tunnel, they cover a big portion of the cost of the high tunnel. So it'll be through the NRCS.
Excellent, thanks, Juan. And we have a couple other points here. One from Diana Garcia Padilla with Hope out in Harlingen, who's mentioning that they have a watch party out in the Harlingen area, and most of their speakers are Spanish speakers. So Diana, and everyone here who is bilingual prefers to get the information primarily in Spanish. Again, this is we have a live interpreter who is on right now. So again, just like with the Q&A, you wave your cursor over the window, and on the bottom on that toolbar next to the Q&A, there is a little globe, and it says interpretation under it. You click it and you choose Spanish, and anything that is being said in English will be simultaneously interpreted into Spanish. Some of the presentations and some of the stuff will be directly in Spanish, but for those that are in English, Diana, and for others that would prefer it in Spanish, that's the best way. I think a lot of times when we have to do both English and Spanish at the same time, it's just going to take up a lot of time. So apologies for that, Diana, but that's the accommodation right now. Hopefully it'll work out for the best. Juan, quickly, a question from Rocio, who we know and love. With your experience, Juan, what shade cloth percentage would you recommend here in South Texas as a part of your high tunnel?
I would say at least 30% cover, but we use 50% because we know that during the summer is super bright and super hot. So we go with a 50%, but I would say at least 30% cover on the shade cloth.
At least 30% cover. Excellent. Thank you, Juan. We have a couple questions on fungal and mildew issues that might arise within the high tunnel. First would be, this is from Dahlia, what would any person use to sanitize the tunnel from fungal and mildew problems between seasons? And then would building the hoop house using lumber add to the fungal problems, or add to that, would it introduce any sort of biological issues to that environment?
Yeah, well, starting with the wood material, definitely the wood is more porous. It's gonna be housing more spores for fungal diseases, and that's why most of the structures right now are metal. Some people, like I said, I mean, they use what they can, but yeah, definitely the wood will be a host of more fungal diseases. For disinfection after your growing season, there is some products out there that use peracetic acid, which is a better alternative than chlorine or chlorine. So yeah, there is commercial products, jet oxide. I would recommend those to do a spray after you grow all your crops. Most of the times there is going to be a little bit of fungal disease, so it's a great idea to go out there and spray with that peracetic acid at the recommended rate on the bottle. Just spray your structures, just spray a little bit on your soil, and that'll help for the next growing season.
Excellent. Thanks, Juan. We have another question from Jorge Peña. Jorge is asking, are there any considerations for well water versus city water irrigation for high tunnel? Like do those water questions, do they change all of a sudden once you're using a high tunnel versus just sort of planting in the ground with any type of coverage?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can use both as long as you have good quality water. If it's a well water, it will have to be tested so it's not high on salts or on boron or any other minerals that can be toxic to the plants. So you can use both. A recommendation for both city water and well water is you're gonna need a pressure regulator. Sometimes those well waters, the pumps are very strong, and the drip tape on the drip irrigation that you use, it can only take so many um, pounds of pressure. So you need to use a pressure regulator on both that is gonna prevent your drip irrigation from bursting. And like I said, we are more than willing to help out with those type of question, even if the situation with the pandemic allows, we can pay you a visit and advise you on site. And so, but yeah, you can use both. Just check quality water and the pressure, and you'll be in good shape.
Excellent. Thank you, Juan. We have another question from our former director and leader and spiritual guide, George Bennick, about copies. And this is going to be a question I'm sure you go to any presentation, this question is asked. Where are the presentations going to live? From what I understand, at least right now, all of these presentations will live on our SARA YouTube channel, which I just included the link in the chat. And so once we're finished, we're going to sort of process all these videos, make sure they're short and tight, and just kind of like get to the point, and we're going to post them there so that we might be actually sharing PowerPoint presentations themselves, but the videos of the presentations themselves will live in perpetuity on the SARA YouTube site. So make sure to go there and subscribe for the different trainings and sort of informational sessions that we have from this conference and then in the future across many of our projects. Juan, we have a few more questions. We only have about a minute left before we're going to transition over. So pretty quickly here, we have another question that says, people have seen double-walled high tunnel units with about a 2-inch gap between the plastic sheets. Does that make sense here in the valley? I mean, a lot of high tunnel stuff comes from the north, and it's about protection from the cold, which is, of course, valid here, but it's less essential. So that sort of like double wrap, how often do you see that here? Is that as crucial?
I haven't seen many of those. I know for up north, it'll be very helpful because of the snow and the strong colds. So that's to provide more insulation to the cold temperatures. And you actually need a little fan that is gonna keep both surfaces separate. There is gonna be space between each layer of plastic, and it's gonna be, let's say, kind of inflated. If the fan is not blowing, then those two plastics are gonna get together, and it's just gonna be like a little thicker plastic. So you need a little fan, but I wouldn't consider it for here for the valley unless it's a crop like that it cannot tolerate any cold at all. Maybe you can consider doing that. Now I know NRCS, if you are planning on using NRCS programs, the structure needs to be just the typical structure, just one layer of plastic. And I don't think you can use any like fans or cooling pads or things like that. So just to check that with NRCS if you are gonna go that route. But I will keep it just, I mean, we have been growing it just with one layer of plastic. I think for the valley or for South Texas, that should be okay.
Okay, excellent. Juan, thank you so much. We're out of time for now. That was great.